Dr. Minji Kim felt like she was drowning in light. Her eyes burned as they adjusted to the harsh white glow above her cryogenic pod. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. 500,000 years. That's how long. She had been asleep in this frozen tomb beneath what used to be the Arctic ice. The revival chamber filled with the sound of her ragged breathing. Around her, thousands of other pods were beginning to open with soft hissing sounds. People were waking up everywhere, coughing and gasping as their bodies remembered how to live again. Some were crying. Others just stared at the ceiling in shock. Minji forced herself to sit up, even though her head felt like it was splitting apart. The medical scanners attached to her pod beeped softly, checking her vital signs. Everything looked normal, considering she had been technically dead for longer than human civilization had existed on Earth. "Welcome back, Dr. Kim." The voice came, from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was Heimdall, the artificial intelligence that had been watching over them during their long sleep. "Your revival was successful. All major bodily functions are operating within acceptable parameters." Minji tried to speak but only managed to croak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. A robotic arm extended from the wall, offering her a cup of water. She drank it greedily, feeling the cool liquid bring her vocal cords back to life. "How many?" she whispered. 49,732 humans have been successfully revived," Heimdall replied. "We lost 268 during the awakening process. Their systems were too damaged by time to restart properly." The numbers hit her like a punch to the stomach. Those weren't just statistics. Those were people, friends, colleagues, fellow survivors who had made it through humanity's final days only to die in their sleep. But there wasn't time to grieve. Not yet. Minji pulled herself out of the pod and walked on shaky legs toward the observation deck. Her bare feet were cold against the metal floor, but she barely noticed. What she saw through the thick windows made her blood freeze. Earth was still there. But it wasn't Earth anymore. Massive alien ships hung in the sky like metal mountains. They were pulling apart what was left of the planet's surface with enormous mining beams. Chunks of rock and metal floated up toward the ships, disappearing into their cargo holds. The oceans were gone. The continents looked like broken bones. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how organized it all looked. The aliens weren't destroying Earth out of anger or hate. They were treating it like a job, like they were cleaning up after a party that ended a long time ago. "They think we're extinct," Minji said out loud. "Correct," Heimdall confirmed. "According to intercepted communications, humanity has been classified as a dead species for approximately 300,000 years. Our artifacts have been collected and distributed to museums throughout what they call the Reclamation Collective." Minji watched one of the alien ships carefully extract what looked like the remains of the Statue of Liberty. They handled it gently, almost reverently, like archaeologists uncovering a precious relic. "They're studying us," she realized, "like we're some kind of ancient civilization." "The collective consists of 6 different alien species," Heimdall explained. "They consider themselves the galaxy's historians. They travel from world to world, documenting dead civilizations and preserving their cultures." The irony was almost funny. Almost. Other survivors were starting to gather around the observation windows now. Minji could hear them gasping and whispering as they saw what had become of their home. Some were angry, some were scared. A few were just crying quietly. Dr. Kyung-ho Nam, one of the military advisors, joined her at the window. His face was hard as stone as he watched the alien operations. "How long have they been doing this?" he asked. "Based on the evidence, they began systematic mining operations approximately 200,000 years ago," Heimdall answered. "They believe they have successfully cataloged and preserved all significant aspects of human civilization." Kyung-ho laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They have no idea we're still here. That gives us an advantage," Minji said softly. "They're not looking for survivors because they don't think there are any." Around them, more people were gathering. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, soldiers, the last remnants of humanity. all staring out at their violated world. But Minji could see something else in their faces now, alongside the grief and shock. Determination. "We need to stay hidden," she announced to the growing crowd. "Until we understand exactly what we're dealing with, we remain ghosts. We watch, we learn, and we plan." The Prometheus Vault had been humanity's final gamble. While the world burned above them, the greatest minds of their species had worked frantically to preserve not just human lives, but human knowledge, human culture, and most importantly, human hope. Now that gamble was about to pay off in ways they never could have imagined. Captain Dongyun Park crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel, his headlamp cutting through the darkness ahead. The metal walls around him were covered in frost, but the air was warm enough to breathe. After 3 weeks of being awake, his body had finally adjusted to being alive again. Behind him, 5 other scouts followed in single file, their movements careful and quiet. The tunnel stretched for kilometers underground, connecting the Prometheus Vault to other hidden settlements that had been built during humanity's final desperate years. Before the Great Sleep, the builders had worked like madmen to create this network. They knew that when humans finally woke up, they would need more than just survival. They would need each other. "Contact ahead," whispered Ji Hyun, the communications specialist crawling behind Dongyun. Her scanner was picking up human life signs from another vault. "Looks like Vault Artemis. They're responding to our signals." Dongyun felt his heart beat faster. Vault Artemis had been designed to preserve humanity's greatest engineers and scientists. If they had survived the long sleep, it meant humans still had access to the knowledge needed to rebuild civilization. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and suddenly, Dongyun was face to face with people he hadn't seen in 500,000 years. They looked different somehow. Healthier, stronger. Their eyes seemed to shine with an intelligence that was almost unsettling. Dr. Sun Hee Kang stepped forward from the Artemis group. Dongyun remembered her from before the sleep. She had been brilliant then, but now she seemed almost supernatural in her awareness. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge. "The genetic modifications worked better than we hoped," she said without any greeting. "Our DNA was optimized during the sleep cycle, enhanced memory capacity, improved physical strength, better resistance to radiation and disease. We're not quite the same species that went to sleep." Dongyun nodded slowly. He had noticed changes in himself and his people too. They were thinking faster, moving with more precision, and somehow understanding complex problems that would have taken years to solve before. It was like their brains had been upgraded during the long darkness. Over the next few days, contact was established with 12 other vaults scattered across the underground network. Each one had specialized in preserving different parts of human civilization. Vault Athena housed historians, artists, and philosophers who had spent their final years downloading and compressing all of human culture into advanced storage systems. Vault Mars contained military strategists and tactical experts who had been planning for exactly this scenario. Vault Gaia held agricultural specialists and environmental engineers who understood how to rebuild ecosystems from scratch. But the most surprising discovery was Vault Prometheus, a facility that nobody remembered authorizing. When they finally made contact, they learned it contained something incredible: the preserved genetic material and memories of over 10 million humans who had died during Earth's final days. The Vault's AI had been slowly growing new bodies and implanting them with the stored consciousness data. It was resurrection on a scale that bordered on miraculous. Sungmin Lee, a former construction worker who now served as the chief engineer for the underground network, couldn't believe what they were building. The fusion reactors they were installing were more advanced than anything humans had possessed before the Great Sleep. The molecular fabrication systems could create materials at the atomic level, building tools and structures that were impossibly strong and light. "We're not just surviving down here," he told Dongyun during one of their planning meetings. "We're thriving. The aliens up there are using technology that's actually primitive compared to what we've developed." The hidden human settlements were growing rapidly. People who had been asleep for 500,000 years were adapting to their new reality with startling speed. They were building farms that could grow food in complete darkness, creating weapons that could cut through alien metal like paper, and developing communication systems that were completely undetectable from the surface. What amazed Dongyun most was how efficiently they were working together. The genetic enhancements hadn't just made them smarter and stronger, they had somehow made them better at cooperation. People who had different skills naturally found ways to combine their knowledge. Scientists worked with artists to solve problems that pure logic couldn't handle. Military strategists learned from philosophers about the psychology of their enemies. Youngji Park, one of the cultural preservation specialists from Vault Athena, showed Dongyun something that made his blood run cold. She had been monitoring alien communications from the surface, translating their languages and studying their behavior patterns. "They're not just mining our planet," she explained, showing him intercepted alien broadcasts. "They're celebrating. They think they've successfully preserved human civilization by collecting our artifacts. They're proud of themselves for being such good historians." The aliens had built entire museums dedicated to humanity. They were teaching their children about the noble but primitive humans who had destroyed themselves through war and environmental damage. They saw themselves as saviors, preserving the memory of a tragic species that couldn't save itself. They had no idea that beneath their feet, that same species was building something that would change the galaxy forever. Dongyun stood in the main assembly hall of the underground complex, looking out at thousands of humans who were no longer quite human. They were something new, something the universe had never seen before. They had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to their species and turned it into their greatest advantage. The aliens thought they were historians, carefully preserving the past. They didn't realize they were about to become history themselves. Intelligence Officer Hyejin Lee held her breath as she watched the tiny drone slip through the ventilation system of the alien research station. The War device was smaller than a grain of rice, invisible to most scanning equipment and packed with sensors that could record everything from conversations to genetic samples. She had been deploying these microspies for weeks now, building a complete picture of what the aliens were really doing on Earth's surface. From her hidden control room deep underground, Hyejin could see through the eyes of dozens of drones scattered across the planet. The aliens had built massive research facilities where Earth's major cities used to stand. They called themselves the Reclamation Collective, and they seemed to take their work very seriously. "Recording new data stream," she whispered into her headset, alerting the other intelligence analysts. "Drone 77 has infiltrated their main cultural center in former New York." What she saw made her stomach turn. The aliens had built a perfect replica of a human art museum. The walls were covered with paintings that had been carefully extracted from Earth's ruins. There were sculptures, photographs, and even recreated human living spaces complete with furniture and personal belongings. Everything was displayed with little plaques written in alien languages, explaining human culture to visitors. But the visitors weren't just scientists or researchers. They were families. Alien children pressed their faces against display cases, staring at human toys and books. Parents pointed at paintings and spoke in hushed, respectful tones about the tragic human civilization that had destroyed itself. Hyejin switched to another drone that had penetrated their educational facility. Young aliens sat in circular classrooms, learning about human history from holographic displays. Their teacher was showing them images of human wars, environmental destruction, and social conflicts. The humans were a passionate but flawed species, the alien instructor was saying. They possessed great creativity and intelligence, but they could not overcome their violent nature. They serve as a reminder that even the most promising civilizations can fall if they do not learn to live in harmony. The alien children nodded sadly, some of them even looking like they might cry. They genuinely felt sorry for humanity. They had been taught to see humans as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked aggression and environmental carelessness. Hyejin felt sick. The aliens weren't just grave robbers. They were building their entire educational system around the supposed tragedy of human extinction. They were using humanity's story to teach their children about morality and responsibility. But as she continued her surveillance over the following days, she began to uncover something much darker. Late one night, her drones intercepted a private conversation between high-ranking collective officials. They were speaking in a secure conference room, thinking they were completely alone. What Hyejin heard changed everything she thought she knew about the situation. The human extermination went more smoothly than expected, one of the officials was saying. Our bioweapons were completely effective. No survivors, no resistance, just clean elimination, followed by perfect preservation of their cultural artifacts. Hyejin's hands started shaking as she realized what she was hearing. It's our most successful project yet. Another voice added, we now have complete documentation of human civilization from birth to extinction. The museums are drawing record crowds across all member worlds. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The collective hadn't found Earth by accident. They hadn't discovered the ruins of a civilization that had destroyed itself. They had deliberately murdered every human on the surface, then built their museums and research centers on top of the mass graves. How many species have we successfully documented now? Asked a third voice. Including the humans, we've completed full cultural preservation of 47 intelligent species. The collective's reputation as the galaxy's premier historians continues to grow. Other civilizations are actually requesting our services to document their own extinct neighbors. Hyejin had to cover her mouth to keep from screaming. The Reclamation Collective wasn't a group of historians and preservationists. They were systematic murderers who killed entire species and then built museums celebrating their victims' cultures. They had turned genocide into an art form, convincing themselves and the galaxy that they were performing a noble service. Over the next several days, she uncovered the full scope of their operations. The collective had perfected a process. They would study a target species from a distance, learning about their culture and technology. Then they would engineer specific biological weapons designed to wipe out that particular species without damaging their artifacts or structures. After the extinction was complete, they would move in and carefully preserve everything the dead civilization had created. They had done this 47 times. The worst part was how proud they were of their work. Hyejin watched alien scholars give lectures about the importance of preserving extinct cultures. She saw museum directors speaking passionately about their duty to remember the dead. She observed alien politicians using the preserved civilizations as examples in speeches about peace and cooperation. None of them seemed to realize they were the monsters in their own story. Hyejin began sharing her intelligence with the other underground settlements. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some humans wanted to strike back immediately, to reveal themselves and start a war of revenge. But Hyejin had a different idea. They think they're historians, she told the assembled leaders. They've built their entire civilization around the idea that they're the good guys, preserving the memory of tragic species that couldn't save themselves. What if we turned that against them? Her plan was audacious beyond anything humans had ever attempted. The collective believed they were the galaxy's moral authorities, the wise preservers of lost cultures. But what would happen if one of those extinct cultures suddenly came back to life? What would happen if the galaxy learned that their beloved historians were actually cold-blooded killers? The aliens had spent centuries building their reputation on the graves of their victims. Hyejin was going to use that reputation to destroy them. But first, she needed to make sure the galaxy was watching when humanity returned from the dead. Dr. Jaewon Choi stood in the launch bay, watching his team make final preparations for humanity's first mission beyond Earth in 500,000 years. The stealth ship behind them looked nothing like the crude rockets humans had once used to reach the moon. This vessel was built from stolen alien technology, improved with human engineering, and powered by fusion drives that could cross star systems in weeks instead of centuries. Remember, he told his team of 12 operatives, we are already dead. That's our greatest weapon. They can't fight what they believe doesn't exist. The team looked back at him with eyes that glowed slightly in the dim light. The genetic modifications had been extensive. Their bones were denser, their muscles stronger, their brains faster. Some could breathe different atmospheric mixtures. Others could see across broader light spectrums. All of them could survive in environments that would kill a normal human in minutes. Min-Hee Shin, his second-in-command, checked her equipment one final time. Her body had been modified to survive in the high-gravity world of Kepler 442b, where one of the collective's major research centers was located. Her bones were now nearly unbreakable, and her heart could pump blood at pressures that would burst a normal human circulatory system. Intelligence reports are confirmed, she said. The research facility on Kepler 442b houses the complete cultural archives of 17 extinct species, including us. Jaewon nodded grimly. Over the past months, human spies had mapped every major collective installation within 50 light-years of Earth. They knew which facilities held museums, which ones conducted research, and which ones served as administrative centers. More importantly, they knew which ones held other species that the collective was keeping as slaves. The ship slipped away from Earth in complete silence, invisible to the alien sensors monitoring the planet's surface. The collective had grown, lazy over the centuries. Why watch for threats from a dead world? Their security was designed to keep museum visitors from touching the exhibits, not to prevent military operations by extinct species. Their first target was a mining facility on Proxima Centauri C. The planet was being strip-mined for rare elements. Its workforce consisting of captured members of various species the collective had conquered, but not yet exterminated. These weren't considered worthy of full cultural preservation treatment. They were just slave labor. Jaewon and his team infiltrated the facility during a shift change. The alien guards never saw them coming. In fact, they literally couldn't see them coming. Human stealth technology had advanced far beyond anything the collective possessed. The operatives moved through the facility like ghosts, invisible to sensors and silent as shadows. But they didn't come to rescue the slaves quietly. When the facility's main computer system displayed a message in perfect human writing, every alien on the mining station stopped what they were doing. The message was simple. The humans are not extinct. The humans remember. The humans are coming. By the time security forces arrived at the computer core, the human operatives were already gone. But they had left behind something that would change everything. A complete database of human technology, human history, and most importantly, proof that humans were still alive. The news spread through collective communication networks like wildfire. At first, the authorities tried to dismiss it as a hoax or a computer malfunction. But then similar incidents began happening across dozens of worlds. Human agents appeared in collective museums, uploading new exhibits that showed human life after the supposed extinction. They infiltrated research centers and left behind samples of advanced human technology that was far superior to anything the collective possessed. Dr. Yeonsoo Park, operating on the academic world of Gliza 6677cc, had perhaps the most important mission. She broke into the collective's central historical archive and uploaded a complete record of humanity's survival. But she didn't just add the information quietly. She made sure it was discovered in the most dramatic way possible. During a live broadcast of the galaxy's most popular historical documentary series, Yeonsoo hacked into the transmission and appeared on screens across 12 star systems. She spoke calmly into the camera, explaining how humans had survived their supposed extinction and had been watching the collective for decades. "You have built museums to honor the dead," she said. "But we are not dead. We have been studying you while you studied our artifacts. We know what you really are." The broadcast included footage that human spies had collected over months of surveillance. It showed collective officials discussing their systematic extermination programs. It revealed their plans to eliminate 3 more species within the next decade. Most damaging of all, it included audio recordings of them laughing about how easy it had been to fool the galaxy into believing they were historians instead of murderers. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Across collective space, the enslaved species began to revolt. They had been told that resistance was hopeless, that the collective was too powerful to fight. But if the humans could survive and strike back, maybe there was hope for everyone else. Jaewon coordinated with resistance movements on 12 different worlds, providing them with human weapons and tactical advice. The rebels were no longer fighting alone. They had allies who understood exactly what the collective was capable of, because humans had already survived the worst they could do. The collective's leadership tried to maintain control, but their authority was crumbling. How could they claim to be peaceful historians when there was video evidence of them planning genocides? How could they maintain their moral authority when one of their supposedly extinct victims was broadcasting their crimes to the entire galaxy? Within weeks, 3 collective member species had withdrawn from the alliance. 2 others were fighting civil wars as their populations learned the truth about what their governments had been doing. The remaining species were struggling to maintain order as their own citizens demanded answers. J1 stood on the bridge of his ship watching alien worlds burn in the distance. He felt no satisfaction in the destruction. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. The collective had built their civilization on mass murder, and now that foundation was cracking. But the real war was just beginning. The collective still had massive military forces, and they were no longer pretending to be peaceful historians. They were showing their true nature as the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Humanity had lit the fuse. Now they had to survive the explosion. Dr. Minji Kim stepped onto the podium of the Galactic Assembly, her footsteps echoing in the massive chamber that housed representatives from hundreds of worlds. The silence was deafening. Every eye from dozens of different species was focused on her. Many of these beings had grown up visiting museums dedicated to her supposedly extinct race. Now she stood before them, very much alive, ready to deliver the most important speech in galactic history. "My name is Dr. Minji Kim," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I represent the human species. We are not extinct. We never were." The reaction was immediate chaos. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting in languages from across the galaxy. Some were demanding proof. Others were calling for security. A few were simply staring in shock, as if they were seeing a ghost speak. Minji waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Behind her, a massive screen displayed images that human agents had been collecting for months. Photos of the underground, cities, video of the thousands of humans who had awakened from their long sleep. Most importantly, recordings of collective officials discussing their extermination programs. "For 500,000 years we have been watching you," she said. "We know about the 47 species you have murdered. We know about the museums you built on their graves. We know about the lies you told your own people." In the viewing galleries above, she could see collective officials frantically trying to leave the assembly hall. But human security teams, working with sympathetic alien species, had already sealed the exits. Nobody was going anywhere until the truth was fully revealed. The next few hours changed everything. Minji presented evidence that human intelligence services had been gathering for decades. Audio recordings of genocide planning sessions, video footage of biological weapons being deployed against innocent populations, financial records showing how the collective had profited from selling the artifacts of their victims. But the most damaging evidence was the simplest: human survivors themselves. Thousands of them appeared via holographic projection, speaking directly to the assembly. They told their stories of the long sleep, of waking up to find their world being strip-mined, of watching their culture being displayed in alien museums while they hid in the darkness. Within days of the assembly session, the collective began to collapse. 3 member species immediately withdrew from the alliance, their populations horrified to learn what had been done in their names. 2 others descended into civil wars as citizens demanded their leaders be held accountable for genocide. The remaining species struggled to maintain any kind of governmental control as protests erupted across their worlds. But Minji and the other human leaders had no interest in watching the galaxy tear itself apart. They had learned something during their long exile that the collective never understood. Survival wasn't about being the strongest or the most ruthless. It was about building something better than what came before. "We could have stayed hidden," Minji announced in a follow-up broadcast that reached every world in the galaxy. "We could have built our own empire in the shadows, using our advanced technology to conquer those who wronged us. But that would make us no better than the collective. Instead, humanity made an unprecedented offer: Earth would become a neutral sanctuary, open to any species facing persecution or extinction. The planet that had been stripped of its resources would be rebuilt as a haven for refugees and a center for genuine cultural exchange. The first refugees arrived within weeks. They were members of species that the collective had been planning to preserve next. Families who had fled their homes when they learned they were on the extermination list. Scientists and artists who had been working in secret to preserve their own cultures before the collective could destroy them. So-Young Han, one of the human engineers who had helped design the underground cities, found herself working with alien architects to build new settlements on Earth's surface. Together, they were creating something that had never existed before, a truly integrated multi-species civilization. "It's strange," she told Minji during one of their planning meetings. "These beings grew up thinking we were extinct. Now they're asking us to help them survive." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Aliens who had once studied human artifacts in museums were now learning directly from living humans. Species that had been taught to see humanity as a cautionary tale were discovering that humans had actually solved many of the problems that plagued galactic civilization. The humans had advantages that came from their unique experience. They understood what it meant to face extinction and survive. They knew how to preserve culture without destroying the people who created it. Most importantly, they had learned to see beyond the immediate needs of their own species. Jisoo Park, who had been one of the original architects of the underground network, was now helping to establish similar hidden sanctuaries on 12 other worlds. These weren't just hideouts for humans. They were safe havens for any species that might need to disappear quickly if another organization like the Collective ever rose to power. "We're not trying to rule the galaxy," she explained to a group of alien refugees. "We're trying to make sure nobody else can rule it either." The human population was slowly growing through advanced reproductive technology that could bring back people from genetic samples preserved during the long sleep. But growth wasn't the goal. Stability was. The humans were positioning themselves as reluctant guardians of galactic peace, intervening only when necessary to prevent another systematic extermination. As Minji stood on the rebuilt surface of Earth, watching the first mixed-species children play in parks that had been wastelands just months before, she realized they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had turned humanity's greatest tragedy into the galaxy's greatest hope. The species that had once hidden in the darkness to avoid extinction was now ensuring that no other species would ever have to make that same terrible choice. They had become the custodians of something precious, a galaxy where diversity was protected rather than destroyed, where cultures could flourish without fear, and where the strong protected the weak instead of preying upon them. It was the civilization humanity had always dreamed of building, born from the ashes of the one they had lost.